Welcome to another Talking Heads. Barry Milnes here with Richard Evans, long-time tennis journalist, and myself also covering the sport for over 30 years. But Richard, we're here to talk about two guys who obviously have had difficult times recently in Andy Murray and Novak Djokovic. The injuries that they have been struggling with that eventually caught up with them at Wimbledon. Firstly, just to talk about Andy Murray as defending champion and the hip problem. It's something, it appears, that has hampered him for a while, and he clearly tried and tried, but ultimately in vain.
Yes, apparently it's been worrying him for some time, but apparently he really aggravated it at the French Open. Got through there, got within a tie-break of reaching the final, so that was a good effort. But it was obvious when he came over on the grass. He lost in the first round of Queens. People who saw him practice, he was walking with a limp, and by the end of his mammoth five-set match against Sam Querrey, he was walking with a very serious limp. Now, this hip business could be serious. I mean, we saw Gustavo Kuerten, Marcelo Rios and Magnus Norman all have their careers ended before they were 30 by hip problems. Now, medical science has moved on a little bit since then, but it's still something that the medical people tell me could become chronic. And, he's only 29, or he's just 30 now. Sure. So I think, I'm sure we go on and talk about Djokovic, but I think it's time for both of them to take a very long rest.
Yes, for Djokovic, his elbow problem resurfaced. He came up short against Thomas Berdych, retired, actually had to pull out of that match in the second set, and he's just not been quite right, has he, for a while. It is something we have seen him have treatment for on court, and obviously heard that he's had more off it over the last year really, and it kind of coincides with the dip that he's had since he won that French Open title in 2016. So the question comes, well, should players step away and take a long break to really get fully fit? Both of them play with a very physical style of game, which obviously has the wear and tear, and they've been doing it now for over a decade. Of course, it's just 1 week apart in their ages, but both have now gone over that 30-year age barrier. And yet you look at Roger Federer winning a Grand Slam at the age of 35 in Australia, obviously going so far and so well at Wimbledon. Rafael Nadal, also a year older than Murray and Djokovic, coming back after his enforced rest last year with the wrist problem, and he shut down his season early. So it kind of begs the question, as if to say, well, why not do what they have done, doesn't it?
I think they ought to take the hint from the two elder members of the top four who've played so much tennis over the past decade at such a high velocity sport. I mean, it's incredible the strain they put on the bodies. And given that Murray and Djokovic are younger, they have more time, if you like, to take 6 months off. I mean, it sounds drastic, but my advice, for what it's worth, would be to take 6 months. Forget this year. Really let your body and your mind come down, because the effort that Murray put in the last 6 months last year, winning practically everything, and Djokovic the first 6 months of the year going and winning everything, the body eventually says, help, I can't take this. I mean, Murray got shingles, not unrelated. I'm told that apart from the shingles, after he won Dubai, he woke up the next morning with a red body rash. This is the body crying out and saying, you're pushing me too far. So I think, yes, I think both of them should take 6 months off.
Well, I would tend to agree with that. Another thing I think in Murray's point of view is that obviously, in fact, in both of their points of view, their wives are expecting babies, and kind of, they could take the time out, just sort of recharge and enjoy the comforts of home and family life, which is a rare thing that they get anyway on the tour, and that then they can come back fully fit, if the bodies can get fully fit and refocused. And you think in Murray's case, of course, it's Djokovic who's been the man who's eventually stopped him at the Australian Open so many times, but if he could get fully fit and go back at the start of 2018, that would be an ideal scenario.
It would be, and the interesting thing is that Roger Federer took 6 months away, and he went to Australia, and he felt himself, if I get to the quarterfinals, I'm going to be doing well. And then he shocked himself and everyone else by beating Nadal in the fifth set in the final. So it just shows, what you can do coming back after a very long layoff, and I think they ought to think about it.
For Murray, there is that number one ranking that he still has post Wimbledon, but he understands. It will eventually go from him sooner rather than later, probably now. But at some point that should happen, and to try and come back perhaps in the middle of the autumn, one might say that's going to be very difficult to keep then feeling you've got to try and defend another title, because all those titles he won at that stage last year. But it just seems to me, although these guys are so competitive and they're so used to going through this time and time again, and they may be reluctant to give up such amount of time to the others because the game is always evolving. As we said, I think proof is in the pudding. We've seen what Nadal and Federer have done this year after their long breaks.
Yes, I think Murray shouldn't worry about the number one ranking. He's achieved it. He's been there. He'll have been there for over 6 months. And what he wants to do when he comes back, if he does take a rest, is win more Grand Slam titles, which, if his body is right, he will be able to do.